Pozdrav dragi gledatelji! Nastavljamo s posebnim izdanjem AFK Showa u kojem vam donosimo presjek najbitnijih tema i govornika sa nedavno održane konferencije Business and Gaming. Epizoda donosi predavanje Hendrika Lessera iz Europske federacije razvijača igara, odnosno EGDF-a. Hendrik govori o stanju europske razvojne scene i spominje stanje hrvatske razvojne zajednice te kako države mogu pomoći daljnjem razvoju industrije videoigara.
Sada je vrijeme čuti koju pametnu o stanju gaming industrije u Europi i to od čelnog čovjeka Europske Game Dev Federacije. Hendrik Lesser, izvršni direktor developerske tvrtke Remote Control Productions, karijeru je počeo prije više od 20 godina, a danas ima izgrađenu obitelj neovisnih studija diljem Europe i šire, koja se sastoji od 14 timova u 6 zemalja s više od 450 strastvenih kreatora igara. Lesser je strastveni ambasador i predavač za unapređenje igara kao tehnike kulture, a obnaša funkciju predsjednika Europske Game Developerske Federacije. Hendrik, nažalost, ipak nije mogao danas i osobno nazočiti na konferenciji, ali zato je snimio svoje predavanje koje ćemo sada poslušati.
Hi, welcome to Croatia Business and Games Conference. I'm Hendrik Lesseru. I'm the president of the EGDF, that's the European Games Developer Federation. We represent all kinds of national trade organizations in Brussels, but also not only members from the European Union. And I'm here to tell you a little bit about Europe and also about the Croatian perspective and especially my advices and learnings over all these years, what could be done and should be done in an ecosystem like yours in Croatia. So without further ado, let's start. As you can see the presentation, I will share some data too. We will also share the presentation later, so you have everything after the show. So, EGDF again. We are 23 trade organizations. We represent 2,500 different studios all around Europe, and that's roughly 40,000 people. So we are by far representing the most developers in Europe, and we are also and always have been quite developer-centric. So 2020, why 2020 if it's 23? This is because data collection on the European scale is a massive undertaking, quite difficult. And also, to be honest, please take all the numbers with a certain grain of salt. All the countries do collect data differently. So this is basically our lens, our perspective. It's not the ultimate truth. So what do we know about the industry? Here's a couple of the numbers from all over Europe. And as you can see, the UK is still leading. Croatia, in regards to the studios, is still a runner-up. And I'm pretty sure that in the last couple of years, the number went up because Croatia is one of the up-and-coming countries in Europe. What else? How many people is that? I'm pretty sure there's more people than 320 with some of the international studios being found, but that's again the number of people we have. You see Serbia has a multitude. There's this as a neighboring country. I'm sure you all understand there's many reasons here. It's a certain kind of gateway into Europe, and Croatia, as just joining also Schengen area, is way more European Union than some of the neighboring countries. And that is in 9 out of 10 cases a good thing, but in some cases in regards to regulatory stuff, level of wages and so on, you could argue it's not a best thing. And of course, when we talk about salaries and all this, I want all the salaries to be as high as possible for the individual, but it's still a business. So we have to make sure that we can run our business profitable or at least reach a break even to make it sustainable, which is, by the way, also something which is deeply important to myself. So another number, which is nowadays, of course, way more interesting than in the past, is the number of women. And that has been going up. By the way, for some of you who don't know this, in the very early days of the games industry, let's talk 40, 50 years ago, we had a way bigger percentage of women. But there's many reasons why it actually went down. And now in the last 5, 10 years, it started to go up again. In my personal opinion, I think we can only make cool games if we have representation in our teams too. And that's women, that's people of color, of all kinds of creeds, of religions and all that. I always say, not everybody's invited. I don't like white supremacists and Nazis, but besides that, everybody should be also ideally part of our teams to make cool, interesting, and ultimately, that's also why I believe so strongly in Europe. Diversity in Europe makes us strong. Differences of opinion, differences of backgrounds actually help us create cool, interesting, compelling stories in the first place. So let's keep pushing for this. That would be my advice. So total turnover. We are here at a business conference, so money does talk, right? Here you can see that a lot of the, of course, bigger countries in Europe do the biggest turnover. We have countries like Turkey in the last years basically gaining places here quite quick, and Croatia is still kind of small, but it's also developing, and I'm very, very keen and positive about the future also in regards to Croatian games. Here is a couple of relative numbers, and I'm not going to go into every little slide, but just to show you a little bit where you are. The circle means that this is also where Croatia is. So there is some countries which are quite different in the relations here, and I think Croatia is basically still a runner-up. And what there is important is Croatia always has been traditionally in games. I think you're all aware of Crow Team. I worked on one of the Crow Team games, the second counter of Serious M, 2001 myself, so that has been a while. So there's always been studios in Croatia with also good technology and an idea what a fun game is, which is quite important if you are a evolving country in regards to games. It's actually the most easiest to learn is to do QA. The second is to do art, then code, and then ideally do all of it together, including game design and production, and having a business sense, having enough people who understand how to do business here in games all around the world, which is multifaceted, because you can actually publish your game on your own. That's called self-publishing. But the more traditional route is working with the publisher, where you develop the game and the publisher finances it, or at least markets and distributes the game. So as you can all see, Croatia is still not at the top, but it's kind of going forward. And what I said before of the country itself, I've been going to Reboot now for many years, and I think if you haven't been there in lovely Dubrovnik, then please go. It's one of the best conferences in Europe, and it's definitely a place where you can get a better idea and feeling on what the games industry is really about. And I've been fortunate enough in my role as president of EGDF to also meet some of your national politicians, to have discussions there about subsidy systems, about what's really important to move forward in Europe. And a couple of those examples on what you can do to move forward in the games industry is, first of all, acknowledge that it exists. Sounds like an easy thing, but in many countries that's not even done yet. So it's important for a society to not look down on game developers, but to basically give them a certain level of respect and acknowledge that making games is the cultural technique of this century. And it's a business, and it could be used and can be used for all sorts of more serious ventures too, as in serious games, educational games. Unfortunately, it became more relevant to also make games with and for the military-industrial complex. Just think training games, for now, to support our brother and sisters in Ukraine. And maybe some of you saw that they learned to shoot an RPG in the basement with using VR technology. So games technology, game design thinking, games as a culture technique is way more than just making business. So ultimately, it's kind of, in my opinion, the spearhead of where technology and making culture actually comes together. And when you think about that, the kind of respect, this idea of confidence, do I want to express myself artistically or politically while making business, is what I meant, to give them the certain respect. The second is, of course, then investing into education, making sure that all those fields from natural science have the right kind of investment from your end, that you have enough professors, that the schools, the universities acknowledge games not just as a side thing, but as something which you can study and learn, especially in a combined sense, that you not only teach coding, for example, but you understand that there is a need for special schools where you bring all the disciplines together to actually finish prototypes and in some cases even its own games. Most of the countries who are leading the pack in regards to all those numbers had very successful educational programs beforehand. And please understand that education, it takes years, right? You will see results in 3, 5, 7, 10 years if you invest in education. But it's, in my opinion, one of the most sustainable things you can do. And when you have those projects coming from universities, coming from students, then what else is needed? Obviously, money. If you want to help a student team to be able to form their own company, become business people on their own, they can't just rely on their rich parents or family and friends and fools. Ideally, you have programs in your country, in Croatia, where you support startups, where you support the ecosystem, where you maybe have incubators, accelerators, or something like this, where a team has a little bit less obstacles to start up their company and their game idea. And besides this, there's obviously private money. So it's like if you do conferences like this, again, mentioning also Reboot, there's not only game developers and publishers and academic people there, there's also investors. So try that you have attractive regulatory framework for investors from the outside of your country, either VCs or private equity or strategic investors, which makes it especially attractive. In some smaller countries in Europe, the tax situation is favorable to that, and so on. And we already see that on top of that, a lot of our countries in Europe actually have specific subsidy systems, either on the regional level, for example, here in Germany, I think now we have 7 or 8 parts of the federal system having their own subsidy program, but we also have a national one. Those national subsidies, if we take, for example, the UK, it's a tax credit. In Germany, it's a grant. In others, it's a subsidy. So there can be all kinds of system. Whatever you do, please set them up with people from the games industry who understand how the financing is done, in what phases all these games are, to make this as kind of directed to success as possible. Then you also might ask yourself, Europe, Brussels, there is a additional regulatory framework. So for example, over the last couple of years, we've been talking about free to play. What does it mean? How can we still safeguard our youth and our children? How can we make sure that people who are so extremely fascinated by it, spending money, might have issues getting away from it? This is all something we from the EGDF side and also our Croatian member is discussing in Brussels on a regular basis to make sure that on one hand side it is favorable for the industry, which is a good thing, but we also kind of follow our civic duty of not coming up just with exploitative tactics, because that's not sustainable. We want the games industry to thrive, to grow in all the different countries. We want to build on that diversity. We want to have more people educated in this, and we want a thriving games industry for the next decades, and if not saying even centuries. And that can only work when we also acknowledge as an industry body that we have a duty to a certain degree come up with self-regulatory ideas, which we think are kind of getting a proper balance between business friendly and actually, helping and having a positive impact on society. So you see here again, Croatia is growing, which is great. Maybe some of you heard that there's also some more international companies who set up shop in Croatia. So again, this is an overall very positive momentum, which ideally you build upon. So I'm pretty sure that I heard of a small program you came up with 1 or 2 years ago. So yes, sure, give them time, let them build on this, let them develop those games in a timely manner. Also, don't bet on the first games coming out through your supported systems to be worldwide massive hits. In some cases, those projects might not be commercially successful, but they help the teams, the companies, to get what I basically call a business card. So they are able to build on that, talk to investors, talk to the publishers and all this. So this is at least a mid and long-term game if you invest into this, into your ecosystem, and is not a short one. Here you can see a couple of those mentioned loans, grants, tax credits, and all this. Again, I'm sharing the presentation so you can dive into this more in detail later. And I really have to give also you guys a personal note. As I mentioned, I've been to Croatia many, many times over the course of years. And I always thought it's so cool to see that there's so much enthusiasm, especially by the young people, to make games. And at the same time, you know, not just trying to intimidate what's been done in, you know, some of the big famous countries where games tradition is old, like the US or Japan or anything like that. I feel that there is a certain drive also from Croatia to express themselves. I know one team, for example, who is like very left-leaning, and they pick up a lot of those ideas of this kind of post-Soviet communist kind of era and so on. And I think that is what makes us stronger and more interesting. I don't just want to play a similar game coming from the US, and worst case, even one which is just more cheap in the production value. I want to see unique games. I want to see people with artistic vision, and of course, at the same time, them trying to be creating a sustainable business, but still, in my opinion, to get a ecosystem thriving, you need lighthouse projects, and those lighthouse projects need to be interesting and good, and getting people who really dive into the content because it's special. So overall, I'm very positive about the industry. I'm very positive about the outlook in Croatia. Go do the work, go dive in, understand that these are people who in most cases are driven, well educated, with lots of ideas for the future. So support your local business and games, help them to go abroad, and nudge your politician to give more subsidies out, recognize the sector better, and support the educational side of it too. So thank you very much for this opportunity to talk to you here, and I wish you all the best. Enjoy the conference, and if you want to reach out, I will share my contact details too. All the best. Bye.
Evo, hvala Hendriku, dobio je pljesak, on ga trenutačno nije mogao čuti, ali zaslužio ga je na ovoj isto zanimljivoj prezentaciji.